always ask what dead person you'd like to meet, and it would definitely be Hemingway for me, but Hemingway in like his 30s, not Hemingway, not old Hemingway. And that meeting with him would be a date. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I'm Tina. Today I'm doing a list video where I'm talking about my top 10 favorite classics. So first of all, I'm not talking about classical literature here, like Greek and Roman based, though I do recommend you check out the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Aeneid, as well as Plato, but classic in the other sense. So what this constitutes isn't entirely set in stone. Most people tend to think a classic is a book accepted as being, exemplary or noteworthy, for example, being listed in a list of great books, or even if it's just like a reader's personal opinion about, their favorite books. For me, classics are something where the writer has been dead for at least 50 years, and their work will persist for centuries to come due to something noteworthy about their styles, themes, or story. So don't get all up in my grill about whether these are truly classics or not. And I will say these are strictly Western classics. I would love to read more classics from other parts of the world, so please recommend some for me. That's a gap that I have in my reading that I'd really like to fill. So just putting that out there. I am well aware of my failings in this regard. So the first one I'm going to talk about is probably one that a lot of people have on their list, and that's Pride and Prejudice. There is a reason why this is a favorite novel of a lot of people. This was actually a hard choice between this and Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South, but I like the dynamic between Darcy and Elizabeth more than between Margaret and John. I can remember their names. I've read this book like 3 times. But what I love about Jane Austen is the undercurrent of sexual tension, the drawn-out, mega slow burn love story, and how the entire thing is not just a fluffy story. It's about how crappy the lot in life was for women in this time period. Austen's work is a critique of how, upper class women aren't allowed to marry for love if they want to keep up a similar standard of living to what they have currently, and they haven't been trained for factory or rural work, so it's not like they can just jump into a career. They have no options. Basically, they have to be mercantile about their choices, and that's kind of what she's critiquing in all of her novels. The reason why Mrs. Bennet is so obsessed with getting her daughters married is because if they don't get married, they will have literally nothing, because women can't inherit. Anyway, I love Jane Austen because I like the subtleties of it. And here's something about me: whenever I'm sick, I watch Jane Austen adaptations. I usually the Keira Knightley, Pride and Prejudice, but I would definitely watch the new Emma again with Anna Taylor, whatever her name is, the chess one. The one who's going to be playing New Furiosa in the Mad Max movie. I'm very excited because she's a good actress. Anyway, I like the Emma Thompson Sense and Sensibility as well. It's really slow, and the Gwyneth Paltrow Emma was fine, but the new Emma, probably never watched the Gwyneth one again because of the new one. And I'm not into the BBC Colin Firth, I will admit. I like the Keira Knightley version better, so sue me. Anyway. North and South, if you're wondering, has a similar antagonist to marriage, romance subplot, which is, I guess, the old school enemies to lovers. It's set around workers' revolts, though, in Northern England. If you like Pride and Prejudice, I think you'd like North and South. It is a bit more politics to it, but I think that actually makes it a lot more, it gives it a different flair. It's very good. Okay, I'm not going to talk about every single classic at that length. I just figured I'd start with that one. The next one I'm going to talk about is Little Women. I love, love, love this novel. I love it. I read it so much when I was a kid. I think I was like 10 when I first read it, and it's even more interesting when you look at it from like a new historicist perspective now. How she changes the ending based on her publisher's demand, how there's subtle and not so subtle social critiques. There's, an honesty and a rawness to the stories that make it feel so real. And as a woman who has 2 sisters, this novel speaks to me on an emotional level. How you can both hate someone and fiercely protect them at the same time. And I also think all writers can relate to Jo, so there's a lot about this book to like. I also watched the movie when I was sick, the original not original, there's like 10 of them, but the Susan Sarandon one. And I also really liked the remake. I thought it was cool what they did with the ending and how they mixed the timeline around. I really enjoyed it. The next one on my list is one that you would expect given the title of my channel, and that's The Sound and the Fury. I am a huge Faulkner fan. I first read The Sound and the Fury when I was in 3rd year university. It was my first dive into Faulkner. The novel, specifically Quentin's section, really spoke to me on a lot of levels. I was a very angsty young person. And Faulkner's writing, while verbose, is lovely. His metaphors, his descriptions, his deeply depressing characters that represent different facets of society. He has so much depth, and it's just, I don't know, I just can't. I just love Faulkner. Anyway, I also adore how he sets his novels in the same county. You know, Marvel wasn't the first ones to have an expanded universe. And I've got like a stack of his books. This is my stack. I need more. I only have like 7 of them, but I need more of them. Anyway, I've read them all but Light in August, which is on my TBR. Hopefully this year. Maybe. Like most dead white dude authors, you know, there's problematic elements to Faulkner, I will admit, but that doesn't mean I don't think he's an amazing writer. I actually visited his house in Mississippi a few years ago. I went on my honeymoon and dragged my husband there, and he was like, what are we doing? We drove in like the middle of Oxford County, Mississippi, trying to find his house. Anyway, I'm going to show a few pictures because I think it's cool. Yeah, there's me with long hair. Anyway, the next book I'm going to talk about is A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway. So here comes the hill upon which I will die, the common expression that I think is quite funny. I love Hemingway. I love Hemingway. He's an amazing writer. People always ask what dead person you'd like to meet, and it would definitely be Hemingway for me, but Hemingway in like his 30s, not Hemingway, not old Hemingway. And that meeting with him would be a date. It definitely would be. Sorry. Sorry to my partner. Hemingway is my celebrity pass after Garrus Vakarian from Mass Effect. A lot of readers who haven't read him seem to think that he's like a sexist bore or something, which couldn't be further from the truth, really. Hemingway's novels center men, but they have well-developed female characters. They're strong, as in they have agency, and they're treated with respect. A Farewell to Arms is about a man losing his family. It's not some raw man story like H. Rider Haggard would write, you know, where women are kind of on the periphery or are just used as in tropey ways or as vehicles to further the man's story. Hemingway is a deeply emotional man who was masculine because of his emotional expression. Sure, he was an ambulance driver in World War I, which is badass. You know, he loved to hunt, and he's all about whiskey and mustaches, but these things don't make him a bad man. He was simply a man who enjoyed what are now considered stereotypical male activities. And I think a lot of the stereotypes around that kind of derive from him. You know, he's a remnant of the fin de sec, where the modern concept of masculinity came from. I will argue that people who don't like Hemingway, without reading him, have this opinion of him because of the way the media has portrayed him, and they seem to take from this and think that, oh, he's just going to be saying sexist and racist things all the time. But this isn't true. If you don't like how Hemingway writes, that's fine, I understand. He has a very specific style, but don't tell me you don't like an author when you haven't even read them. He's been dead for 70 years. We can read his work from a critical lens in terms of gender and race representation, which we should do. That's an important thing to do. But to outright state that you hate an author before even reading them is ludicrous, especially an author that's been dead for 70 years. Like, this isn't like an author who's around now that says problematic things on the internet. This is an author that lived in the 1920s. Like, anyway, this is a hill upon which I will die, as I've said, and yeah. If you disagree, that's fine. I don't care. Okay, I'm going to talk about Mrs. Dalloway now. Virginia Woolf is a titan of literature, although I've heard she's somewhat mean in person in real life. I was first introduced to postmodernism in university, and Mrs. Dalloway was one of the first books on the syllabus that we approached. I fell in love with it absolutely instantly. It's Woolf's ability, you know, to give us such a complex stream of consciousness that we resonate with the characters on this extremely deep level. Despite how much Clarissa isn't the most likable person, seeing the world through her eyes is such a fun, interesting journey that you actually start to care about her kind of minuscule problems. And, you know, and then pair that with, what was the guy's name? Let's put him back here. Septimus, yeah. Septimus's kind of story where he's slowly growing mad and like comparing those themes to one another and how they interrelate. It's fascinating, especially given Woolf's, you know, history with mental illness. I've read a few of her novels, you know, like Three Guineas, Into the Lighthouse, those things, and I really enjoyed them. I have quite a stack of them. I didn't bring my stack of books here, but I need to get through a few of the big ones. I haven't read Orlando, I haven't read Melancholia, I haven't read, I don't know. She has a ton. The next two I'm going to talk about are kind of a pair for me, in that they're both poetry. And this is W.H. Auden and T.S. Eliot. I figured I'd mention them because they're a big part of my life, and I don't read a ton of poetry, so I'm not going to do like a poetry list anytime soon. So Eliot, because of The Wasteland. The Wasteland had a huge impact on me in my 20s. It was also a part of that early 20th century British literature class I mentioned before. I got a lot of my love of these books from that class. It also didn't help that the professor was smoking hot. He wasn't like attractive hot, but he was one of those people that was so deeply intelligent and so passionate about the subject matter that you just sat in there. You know, in Indiana Jones, when the students are all staring at him with like little hearts in their eyes, like that's how I was in that class. I never missed a class. I didn't miss a lot of classes, actually. Anyway, I actually have a quote from The Wasteland on my back. If you want, do you want to see it? You want to see it? I'll show you my back. Good thing I'm wearing a tank top today. I actually didn't plan this. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, I don't know how well this is going to work, but there's my tattoo. Whoops. It says, "O you who turn the wheel and look to windward," which is part of the poem. I know that Eliot was writing about a cultural societal wasteland, not literal, of course. As I said, I studied the poem in school, but I love post-apocalyptic stuff, clearly. So having the nuclear wasteland symbol there is kind of a joke to me. The stanza also resonated with me because I tend to get lost in my future plans rather than be rooted in the present. I also love boats and the ocean, so anything to do with that. I don't usually get tattoos that don't mean anything. I have 4, I don't even know. Auden is my favorite poet, though. Where did he go? And his interim war period stuff is my favorite. I love Oh, Where Are You Going?, Musée de Beauvoir, The Second Coming, and The Shield of Achilles. Those are my favorite ones. Any ones that kind of deal with foreshadowing of doom. I also really enjoy this one called The Quest, which is a poem sequence. You can see like I've annotated it all. It's like a sequence of poems. They're all connected. They kind of tell a story, but not really. I actually wrote an entire 180,000 word novel based on this poem. Each chapter is takes from one of the poems in the sequence, but I need to rework it because there's an element that's too similar to my current Space Opera trilogy. 2022 plans, I guess. Auden actually died just shy of 50 years ago, 12 years before I was born. Oh my god, am I that close to 50? No. That's terrible news. Anyway, let's move on. Far from the Madding Crowd and Do the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. No, not Tom Hardy, though he's also hot. Anyway, Thomas Hardy is mostly known for Tess of d'Urberville, though he was a prolific writer. He's a male writer who is clearly a feminist before his time, as a lot of his novels deal with the bullshit women had to deal with in the 19th century, as well as highlighting the way the middle class and working classes were trodden on by the rich. Given my previous comments on this channel regarding the rich and feminism, it's clear Thomas Hardy resonates quite strongly with me. I think I like Far from the Madding Crowd the best, but Jude the Obscure has the most insane what the fuck moment of pretty much any book I've ever read. It is a mind-blowing twist, and it's terrible, and it's just, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. His novels aren't the happiest of novels. Generally, they are quite depressing, but they are always poignant, and they're deeply interesting, and his character is very well developed. I need to read more of his, as I've only read those 3. But I've got a few of them lying around my house somewhere. The Mayor Casterbridge, I think. Do I have anything else over there? Whatever. Third last, we've got Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I have read all of the Bronte sisters' work, and while Jane Eyre, is a top contender as well, and I really like Anne Bronte's stuff too, I think I like Shirley the best out of all of them. This is strictly domestic fiction. It's set in the social backdrop of an uprising in a textile factory, though the story is more about the characters than that, but that is an important backdrop for it. What I really love is how Shirley, the titular character, is an independent heiress. So she's a lot of fun. She doesn't give crap about anything. She doesn't listen to people. She's a really interesting character. It's like a mix of Pride and Prejudice in North and South with a bit more social focus than the romantic relationships. I mean, it doesn't go as far as Middlemarch in terms of being strictly domestic fiction, but it's around there. Anyway, it's really good. And second last, we've got, not like these are any order, we've got The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This book is considered one of the masterpieces of the 20th century, and I totally agree. This book is amazing. It's amazing. It's so funny, and it's so well written. I read it when I was in Cuba, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I was entranced the entire time. Like, I was just like, I think I read it in one day. Like, I was so into it. The characters are a delight, and even if you aren't up on what the book is satirizing, because it satirizes a lot, it's still a fantastic read. It's both incredibly deep and easy to follow, and the plot is just wild. I mean, the devil is a character. There's cats in it. There's everything you could want. I need to reread it again, and soon. It's so good. I've got the Diana Bergen and Catherine O'Connor translation, which I really like. So I recommend that one. I tend to like female translators anyway. And last one is Dracula. Look at the little tiny Dracula I have. I had to include Dracula because it's fantastic. I don't need to tell you the damn story. Everyone knows Dracula. But even if you've watched every single movie and show adaptation, including homages like Castlevania, which, to be honest, is fantastic, but it's so damn dark. I haven't been able to get through the second season because it's so dark. I'm just worried it's gonna, like, traumatize me in some way. Like, in season 1, there was a scene. It's just a brief scene, and I just, like, ugh. Anyway, if you haven't read this book, you should. It's so, so good. You wouldn't even know it was written 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, because it's all written in diaries and letters, so it's an epistolary novel that I actually really like, because it's very hard to do these properly, and I just seriously read it. It's so good. It's even sexy. Like, it's shocking. I don't recommend you read it in a tiny little version, though. Like, I don't understand. I like the gold on it, though, but still, like, what the heck. Other classics I recommend. I'm going to throw them up here because I don't want to do any editing of this video. I've got a stack. I've got The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I've mentioned this in my review of Mexican Gothic. This is a really, really good Gothic mystery. It's fantastic. I recommend it. Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno is a lot of fun if you like torture, but, I'm kidding. Kind of. But, you know what got me into reading Dante? So, Pirates of the Caribbean. I saw them, the movie came out when I was 17 or 18, and at one point, Johnny Depp, I watched the movie a lot. I saw it 4 times in the theater, and then I watched it, and I worked at the movie rental store, so I put it on constantly in the background when I was working. Anyway, Johnny Depp, he says, the lowest circle of hell is meant for betrayers and mutineers, or something like that, and I was like, what does that mean? And I looked it up, and he's talking about Dante, because that's what happens in Dante. So, if you like old Italian poetry, check out Dante, I guess. And don't read the other two, they're boring. Proust, obviously, Swan's Way. If you want to learn more about Proust, check out my Proust Reflections playlist. Nobody does, but that's fine. The Odyssey and the Iliad are both fantastic. I like the Iliad more because the gods fighting is so cool. It's so cool. They like, oh, it's neat. But, so this version of the Odyssey is translated by Emily Wilson. It's the first female translation. I haven't read it yet, but it is on my list for sure. Obviously, I have it because I've only ever read the, I think it's the Latimer translation. I don't even know. I've only ever read male translations. And apparently, the female translation takes a lot of new meaning to the story in the way that the women are treated and the way that the women are described and things like that. So I'd really love to read it to get a different kind of take on it. What else do I have here? I have Ulysses. I was going to talk about this in this list, but then and then I figured actually I'm going to talk about it in a different list, so I didn't talk about it. But you should read it. Ulysses is intense, but it's good. Anything by Edgar Allan Poe, amazing. This is a small version. I actually have a huge, like, complete collection of his works one. Everything I've read of his, I love. The Fall of the House of Usher, The Cask of Admonded, blah, 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 blah. The one where he bricks the guy up. The Mask of the Red Death, very poignant today. You know, Annabelle Lee is probably one of my favorite poems. He's just so good. It's gross that he married his cousin, but whatever. Anna Karenina, whatever, however you say her name. I really enjoyed that book by Tolstoy. I don't have a copy. I got it from the library years ago. I probably won't ever reread it, but it was definitely worth a read. Middlemarch, I think I mentioned this before. Middlemarch by George Eliot. I considered putting this on my list, but Shirley won it out. Middlemarch is great. I mean, it's a beast, but it's a really good domestic fiction. To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't have it. Where did it go? So I read this all the time when I was 12. Like, I read it all the time. We had to read it in grade 6 for class, and I loved it. I obviously realize now that it has problematic elements to it, but I really identified with Scout in the book. It's definitely a book I'd let my daughters read when they're old enough, but we talk about stereotypes and, you know, wrongful depictions, things like that afterwards. I think it's still a good book for kids to read, but you have to talk with them about it afterward. It's one of those critical analysis books, I think. Tale of Two Cities by Dickens, I would argue, is the best Dickens, but I have read, Great Expectations and all of those. Tale of Two Cities is more fun, and there's also my favorite theme, which is guillotining the rich. And then we also have Moby Dick. Skip all the whaling stuff. Other than that, it's really fun. But again, I love boats, so of course I really enjoyed Moby Dick. There's classics I don't like. I'm only going to list 4. Catch-22. I hate that piece of shit. I hate it. I can't stand how the women were treated in the novel, and it turned me right off. Nothing will compel me to read it again. I couldn't stand his repetitive jokes, and I'm just like, ugh. I don't even know if it counts as a classic. I just don't like it. Great Gatsby. I don't like the story. I don't care about rich people, whether they're self-made or inherited. I don't like how Fitzgerald writes. I have tried to read other Fitzgerald novels, but he just does nothing for me. I don't understand what Zelda Fitzgerald saw in him, to be honest. And he stole her work, so screw you, Fitzgerald. On the Road. I don't know if this counts as a classic, but I don't like Jack Kerouac at all. I found the main character, I can't remember his name, in On the Road, irritating. He's insufferable. I couldn't even get halfway through it. Same with Catcher in the Rye. Maybe I just don't like pretentious man babies. That could be a big part of it. Fahrenheit 451 and Brave New World, for me, were just kind of meh. The message was too heavy, I found, for me. I like something a bit more subtle when it comes to a social critique or an allegory, though that rat cage thing from Brave New World will always be in my mind. I would be tempted to, maybe I'd read it again now that I'm a bit older. I think I read them both when I was like 20. But same with The Handmaid's Tale, which I really adore. I wouldn't consider that a classic though, because Margaret Atwood's still kicking around. Even these two, I wouldn't really consider them classics, but people say people consider those two, tend to consider those two to be classics, so I just put my opinion right out there about them. There's some classics I want to read. First of all, as I said originally, more classics by people of color. Please recommend some to me. I would love to read them. I won't get to them till probably the fall, but I would love to at least get through a couple before the end of the year. I'd like to read War and Peace eventually, Don Quixote, The Count of Monte Cristo, Crime and Punishment, and The Forsyte Saga. I would love to read those. Those 5 are kind of on my list. I think next year I'll approach one of them. Maybe I'll do one a year or something like that. Anyway, this has been a bit long. I hope, well, most classics are long, so it's just keeping in with the theme. Let me know, what's your favorite classic? Is there a classic that I talked about that you can't stand? That's cool. Would you also go on a date with Hemingway? You would. I know you would. Come on. He's hot. He's hot. Totally is.